Allô? All right, brilliant. Everyone's in place. Thanks a lot, Martin, for framing that discussion. Obviously, what we heard is that electrolyzers are a key part of the puzzle here, and that there are important trade-offs to be made when it comes to policy, when it comes to industrial policy, when it comes to trades, all with significant bearing on the speed of deployment and on costs. So I'm very much looking forward to discussing this with all of you here. Particularly thanks to Tsvetelina, Penkova, member of European Parliament. You're here with us in between hearings from commissioner designates, so a very busy time for you, and we'll get to that in a moment. Along with you, Philipp Lückerath, Vice President Business Development at Sunfire, Sundus Cordelia Ramli, Chief Commercial Officer, Power to X at Topsoe, and Mattijs Slee, CEO and co-founder of Battolyser Systems. So, Philipp, we start with you. Obviously, Sunfire, I mean, you've been a leader in the electrolyzer space. And the EU has really been a front runner. We've heard this throughout the afternoon, investing really billions of euros into developing this technology. Why is it so important that we stay ahead of the curve as compared to the international competition?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Thank you for being here. So we think there are two main fundamental reasons why that is important to stay ahead in Europe with our technology that we've invested so heavily into. One is for economic prosperity, which is what we talk about. What's our future of industrial manufacturing in Europe? And the second is to achieve our decarbonization goals in general. So around economic prosperity, we've talked about it today already. We've heard it on stage around industries or deindustrialization in Europe. And we also know all the news around the car maker industry as an example of actually a lot of competition also coming from outside. And for us, this is really a sector where we have the technological lead, and there's no fundamental reason why we shouldn't be competitive in it. So it's an economic growth factor, right? Their studies are showing there are millions of potential jobs being created in the sectors, manufacturing electrolyzers, but obviously also other clean tech equipment. And then that's an important issue if we look around Europe and what's our economic future here, right? Not only becoming a service economy, but really staying an industrial powerhouse, right? So this is one important point, turning that technological advantage into a large-scale industry. And the second part is around achieving our decarbonization goals. So we all agree that green hydrogen is a vital part in achieving our carbon neutrality goals by 2050, and also achieving all the goals up until then, 2030 and beyond. And we actually believe that the technological lead we have will lead to the lowest levelized cost of hydrogen. So there are discussions now. We just seen the cost curve from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which I'd love to have a chat about later as well, because I don't quite agree on the cost down curve there. And we all know that levelized cost of hydrogen is not just capex, actually it's a minor portion, right? The main part is around the cost of electricity and how to get that down. And this is around efficiency, and this is around reliability of the equipment. And this is where we are leading, and that's what sometimes is not really seen in the project stages that we are in. Just to give one example, so we were actually in a quite large-scale project where we lost by below 10% margin based on capex versus in the end Chinese equipment. But if you look at the whole picture for you want to operate that equipment for 20, 30 years, you'll have a higher efficiency, you have more reliability. We're absolutely convinced that this will be the lower levelized cost of hydrogen, and this is why we need our equipment and the technological lead to advance that. So The other argument obviously is around the resilience, around clean tech supply, which is also an important aspect. But actually we believe that fundamentally to reach a lower levelized cost of hydrogen, we need the best-in-class equipment. We have the lead in Europe. We just need to translate it into a large-scale manufacturing, and then there's no reason why we wouldn't be as competitive or better than any other equipment in the world.
Okay, super. So there's a cost aspect to this, but there's also clearly an industrial resilience issue at stake. When you look, Sundus, when you look at the competitiveness of the European manufacturing of electrolyzers, are you concerned about global dynamics and the competition landscape and fair or unfair competition?
No, absolutely. Of course, I think it would be silly to say that we're not afraid of that. Firstly, I don't think we truly understand how important it is to understand how level the playing field is, or how we can make a level playing field. As you said, when you're comparing to another competitor, for example, as you mentioned Chinese alkaline, it's very difficult to say, is that really truly the cost of production? So that's one of the main aspects here. I think if we want to stay ahead, which is absolutely the need that we need to do, for sure, level the playing field, make sure that we can actually compete against the other technologies that are being provided from third countries. We already have the technology, as mentioned, not only from a corporate perspective, but also from EU. We have invested billions of euros into R&D. We have what I would say, very high performance, high quality, but not just Topsoe, I'm speaking about everybody here in the EU who are manufacturing technologists today. And let's not stop there. Let's make sure that we're able to scale further so that we can put this really premium quality product out there that will, of course, the cost will go down. But we will never get the cost down if we don't just make sure that there are projects that takes FID, not only FID, but that goes into operations, and that is a sustainable business case, right? And then I think the other thing is that we can't wait. It can't be slow. It has to be fast. It's super urgent right now just to make sure that this happens. There is another element when you look at a business case. There is a risk premium that gets put upon new technologies, absolutely. And the more we have data or operational data or references out there, this risk premium will go down. And then, of course, the capex will go down as well. And then eventually what we should be focusing on is the levelized cost of hydrogen, which means how much more efficient can we make our products, how much more easier is it to operate to make sure that the business case is not so tight that we have to shut down projects halfway through. Definitely.
So with scale, you've got a learning curve, all with a view of decreasing costs over time. Mm-hmm. One additional point here, and I'm coming to you, Mattijs, is energy system integration, right? I mean, you've given particular thought about fully capturing variable renewables as part of your business model with your technology. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe throw in there a consideration as to whether you think the global competition is able to match that ingenuity when it comes to energy system integration?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's very hot in here, right? and we're like 2 hours without coffee. So I'm, respect for you diehards to stick up with us. No, system integration. Yeah, we talk about renewable, right? But actually, the part renewable, the solar and wind angle or part of the value chain, we haven't discussed much about. Mm. And I think if we look into the levelized cost of hydrogen, we should really consider the whole value chain. And at the time I worked for Shell, I remembered that every euro invested in an electrolyzer, we were investing 3 euros offshore wind. And basically what I'm saying is, let's look at this whole value chain. If by means of flexibility, for example, we can lower network tariffs. Why? Because guess what? It can help alleviate grid congestion if you suck from the grid when there's a surplus, or give back if there's a deficit. So back to your question, system integration, I think, is an angle that is probably unique, which I don't think has been talked about enough. If we can convert surplus electricity into hydrogen, it's cheap by default. And so there's not such a thing as average energy prices. Mm-hmm. In the Netherlands today, there's like 20% of the time the cost is below 20 euros a megawatt hour in the day ahead. That's compliant for RED II delegated act. Yeah, that's cheap hydrogen. So we need to get our costs down and be super flexible and convert that surplus energy, for which we'll have, by most consensus out there, like 3 to 5 times overcapacity on the generation side by 2050. It's our job to convert that energy into cheap hydrogen. So yeah, system integration cost for me goes way beyond just making sure that the electrolyzer is in tune with the rest of the balance of plant, but it's actually in tune with the whole value chain.
Okay, you have not really answered my question. Is there anything special that you're doing on that in terms of your tech and others matter?
I should have started with that probably. Forgot about that. No, so what we do different than others, I guess, is we have a pressurized alkaline electrolyzer, but that also has battery capacity. So we have a different chemistry, an iron-nickel chemistry that basically holds charge like a battery. So when we charge our electrolyzer, we first charge our electrodes like a battery. And when these electrodes are fully charged, and we keep charging them, we'll produce hydrogen and oxygen. But it also means that at any moment in time, we can actually discharge that energy back to the grid. And hence my story around system integration.
All right, fantastic. Tsvetelina, so you hear a lot of hope here on the stage that with scale-up, a lot of good things will come. Costs will come down. There will be learning over time. There will be better energy system integration. And really, in your role as member of European Parliament, you're already there clearly in the previous mandate with a big role in the Net Zero Industry Act. You know, the EU has really started, developing industrial policies. Can you talk specifically about the Net Zero Industry Act and how this could help that conversation and the electrolyzer manufacturers?
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, it's of key importance because it's very much related, because it set the grounds for what we're going to be doing now in the next 5 years. And as you mentioned, at the moment we have the hearings at the European Parliament of the Commission is designated, and a lot of those questions in terms of how are we going to connect to what we have achieved so far, are we going to continue it? And those questions are coming up. But going specifically to the net zero industry, because it's a very big topic, but it's fundamental for the future onwards in terms of the reindustrialization and the production capacities of the EU, I would just like to emphasize probably on the few important aspects which are very, very crucial for our conversation here. So the first part, of course, is that the Net Zero Industry Act was a list of strategic technologies that are meant to be produced in the EU with the goal to boost the competitiveness of our industry or to actually rebuild it or bring some of it back from where it was exported before. So to do that, we had to set some measurable specific targets, and one of them is that by 2030, 40%, we need to have 40% domestic production capacity for strategic technologies such as renewable hydrogen, solar panels, wind turbines, batteries. So 40% of everything should be coming from the domestic capacity or the domestic value chain. So that's the first measurable target, which basically we are kind of requiring the European manufacturers to start working in those directions. The second important aspect here, like a very key difference to everything that has been achieved so far, is the resilience criteria, which is key because basically the resilience criteria is the one which determines if certain projects or manufacturing capacities would be eligible for public financial support. And now what we mean by resilience criteria is like the specific projects that we would be financing, they should be reducing Europe's dependency on external supply chain. So again, a strong emphasis on here, the domestic production. And they should be contributing to the clean or green transition. So those are two very, I would say, measurable and pragmatic aspects of the legislation we've taken in order to be able to stimulate a lot of the topics that have been covered so far. And of course, there are a lot of other aspects which I'm not going to touch upon in this conversation now, but for instance, easing the permitting procedure, faster processes in that sense, much less administrative burdens. I mean, all the things that we've been debating and complaining for a reason in the past, probably not 5 years, but more than a decade. So the core reason of everything is like we should produce clean technologies. We should consume clean technologies, clean energy, but we should also be able to produce it here in the EU.
Very clear. So Sundus, I mean, there has really been a shift here, right? Last year, Executive Vice President Šefčovič was here at the summit. He was talking about made in Europe, and I remember thinking, sounds absolutely brilliant. You know, what is it going to look like in terms of policies? We've had the Net Zero Industry Act that Tsvetelina just described. We've had the supply chain criteria in the hydrogen bank, the second call. What do you say to people who basically question this approach and say, great, but it's going to be more expensive for developers?
Yeah. Firstly, I think really great work on getting this together super fast as well, right? It's really, really positive, I think, after a lot of intense work, bringing this kind of urgency that we do need in order to maintain what you also mentioned, which is super important here, is the boosting of the EU technology sovereignty. So the reliance of things from the outside can also become a challenge if we are in a dynamic global situation that we are now. So that's great. And then I think absolutely by doing so, and after having invested already in R&D, the next thing is about scaling up, and the next thing is about putting the product out there. This will definitely help the industry build up economies of scale, for sure, absolutely. And then your question, as a developer, now you're going to push that cost towards the developer. I'll go back to what you said, Mattijs. It's like there is a full value chain. The competitiveness of renewable hydrogen costs is not only on the capex of the electrolyzer. Actually, the capex of the electrolyzer is small. So will it increase costs? Probably initially. Is it going to be a huge amount in comparison? Probably not. What else do we need to do? Which means, I'm so sorry to say, you have so much more work to do in the EU Parliament in order to improve other things which you have mentioned. There's been discussions about faster permitting process. Again, as you mentioned, Mattijs, as well, the whole value chain on looking at the component of the power, so the LCOE, and then translating it back to LCOH, and how do we utilize our technology to become more efficient, etc. So I hope that answers your question, but I'm really super happy with this new approach here.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mattijs, one of the missing pieces that has been discussed already this afternoon is the funding, financing, and the stacking, right? I mean, you as Battolyser Systems, you've received support from the EU, from the Dutch government. What can improve here in order to see more FIDs?
So we receive funding for our company, right? Not for the projects. But I think it helps, obviously, to provide those products for the companies. Well, the two things come to mind, right? First of all, if you talk about funding for our company, public funding, be it sort of European or national, it's actually unlocking a lot of private capital. So those two go hand in hand. And ultimately, you know, we've seen the Draghi report as well. There's a lot of capital that needs to be mobilized in order to do all this. And second, I think when we talk about unfair playing fields, we typically talk about our comparison to the US and China, where well, there's not much stick and a lot of carrot in the US, and China is funded like a master plan. In Europe, we don't have that, but there is actually quite a lot of unevenness within the European Union. So some member states, you know, spend a lot of more or invest a lot more than others. So about 50% of the state aid is paid by Germany, for example, another quarter by France, and then the last quarter for all the rest. Unfortunately, I'm part of
the rest.
Is all the rest. Yeah.
Me too.
The famous frugal.
And Denmark too, yeah. So we talked about this over lunch. So yeah, going forward, perhaps I think I would really like to see whether we can level the playing field in Europe, actually, to start with. And I don't know, one idea, if I may be so straightforward, is a lot of the innovation funds or the ETF revenues are actually now distributed by member states, and only a small part by Europe. I suggest changing that around.
I mean, the hydrogen bank is, of course, a European instrument, but, you know, probably you would argue that it's not big enough. And so perhaps, you know, the clean industrial deal can help on that front.
Yeah, but the innovation fund is much larger than just a hydrogen bank.
Indeed,
right?
yeah.
Maybe you want to comment on that, but yeah, it allows Europe basically to distribute that money not only evenly but at the best place, right? For example, you know, obviously that the cost of electricity is better in the south than perhaps in some other parts of Europe.
Okay, Tsvetelina, so you talked about the Net Zero Industry Act from the last mandate, which clearly still needs to be implemented, but of course now the name of the game is the Clean Industrial Deal. Big topic in the hearings of the commissioner designates. You have coming up next week the hearings of Stéphane Séjourné, Teresa Ribera. What are you thinking here? What do you want to hear from those two, you know, incoming executive vice presidents on the Clean Industrial Deal?
This topic is being quite active also this week in the Parliament, because we've already, this morning we had a hearing with Mr. Hoekstra.
Right.
He's also touching upon that part. But the main question what we are asking, and we still haven't received an answer, is what's actually the Clean Industrial Deal? Because it seems that it's touching a lot of the portfolios, a lot of the policies, but no one understands. And no one can provide us an answer to this question, because that's one of the big topics to be discussed in the Parliament, because we're still not sure if we're speaking about an umbrella legislation, something like the Green Deal, which is like basically a set of new and revised regulations and directives, or if it's going to be like one flagship legislation which is going to address the two very key and an important aspect in terms of the permitting and the funding needs. So no one seems to be understanding what has been proposed by the President of the Commission. Jokes aside, no matter how it looks like, the key problem and the key aspect which all the commissioners, we are going to expect them to provide the answer is where is the money going to come from? Because that's still one of the big problems, and it was a big problem also with the Net Zero Industry Act and with STEP, because it's a very nice framework, but it was only based initially on state aid, which is sufficiently not enough when we're speaking about building up an economy, building up manufacturing capacities. Nonetheless, to mention the fact that when we're speaking about state aid, we are differentiating quite a lot between the different member states within the EU, and that's not supposed to be the main industrial policy from our side. Of course, the bigger states and the richer ones would have a bit more capacity to attract manufacturing processes to open up new opportunities for high-paid jobs compared to some of the poorer member states. So we did address that still in the Net Zero Industry Act in terms of it should not be only the state aid. But what has been said, actually, I've put a note on that because it is probably not the best way to have such a decentralized approach and the innovation fund and the ETS revenues to be distributed only by the member states, given that everything is under the umbrella of a common EU strategy. And then we have the decentralized approach of the funding, and they not always match. So what we're calling for now is also to have a strong consideration. I've actually posed that question today to Mr. Hoekstra. We need to use all the available funds we have at the European level at the moment. And one of the big pockets that, I don't know if we're afraid to speak about it enough, is the Resilience and Recovery Facility, because this is by far not invested or utilized. I mean, at the moment, we're still below 40% of full deployment of the available funding. Let's say that by the end of the deadline, we're going to reach 50%, but it's still 50% of the money. Even if there are loans and there's still quite a significant amount of grants available, but this is a resource that is there and we're not managing to put it into proper use. So our call and fight would be to basically make sure that we know what's available, and at least in the more centralized level to dedicate those funds for where they're needed the most if we want to have a proper industrial clean strategy which is working actually all across the EU.
Okay, so I want to go back to the three industry players here. You heard from Tsvetelina about the discussions on the clean industrial deal. Last question to each of you, and we will go Philipp, Sundus, and Mattijs in this order. Assume the money is there, yeah? Assume Tsvetelina convinced Hoekstra and all the relevant people that we need to use RRF money, that there's still pockets of money, we make best possible use of state aid, et cetera, et cetera. What is the one thing that you would like to see that's not money related in the clean industrial deal, yeah? Philipp?
So now I have to decide. So I had a long list. But well, I mean, the clean industrial deal sort of is for us as we see it right now, and there's a lot of things to be clarified as we learn, is the way to make us competitive in the long run with regards to our clean tech industry, right? So target setting, I think that's more or less checked, and I also hear that there's also something coming up for 2040 targets here to just, and that's important to set the course. We touched funding, just picking that up. I think that's a very good point. I think if we look to China and the US, what we are missing is scale, right? And having all these member states doing it differently here and there, and for project developers, it's just very difficult to get things going. So that's for sure a good point. But still, and I'm probably now skipping a few points to come to the one thing, it's still securing the offtake. I don't know if it's directly a clean industrial deal topic, but for us, it's the one key thing of getting this going at scale is, and we saw the figures from Bloomberg, New Energy Finance here. So there are some quotas now, which is a good start, and I mean 2 to 4 million tons. That's 20 to 40 gigawatt. That's a good starting point for having some scale in the industry. But for sure, there needs to come more, and we believe that there's so many sectors like the refinery sector, for example, that could easily bear some cost for green hydrogen if you look at their end products, for example, and that's going to do the deal. Like the order books are not filled. Because the demand is not fully there. Regulation is still missing, and also the red 3 points that we have seen on the list earlier, they need to go into national legislation, which is not an EU topic now, but maybe you can still find ways of streamlining that, right? So that it's not in every member state again a different kind of thing, because the companies we have, they operate in some even globally, but many in Europe, in many different countries. So that's again the scale that we talk about, not having so many different implementations around. So really having centralized EU mandates for green hydrogen. This is the one key thing that will take it to the next level from the good things that have already started.
Please go ahead. Yes.
That was actually a very good point. I just wanted to underline something as well, because in his report, Draghi is also mentioning the lack of coordination among member states as one of the big obstacles to achieving a proper EU competitiveness. So this is a key aspect in what you're mentioning. It's not only about the coordination of the legislation implementation, but also in the business model and the strategies and how we apply them. So we also have this is one of the priorities from now on, and I've heard it as an answer and commitment from quite a few of the commissioners as well, from Energy and from Mr. Hoekstra as well today.
Great to hear. Sundus?
Whatever he said. No, I think maybe not something related to whatever he's already said, right? I think what I would like to ask for is speed in everything that we do, which is super important. So let's just think about, I think you mentioned in the BNF report as well, that we are EU is the only place with the almost complete legislative framework for renewable hydrogen or clean hydrogen as well, right? And then so let's just play around in our head that US elections happened yesterday, and for whatever reason, there could be a scenario that tax credits will extend to hydrogen from fossil fuels or CCS. And then suddenly the competitiveness of green hydrogen becomes a bit different. Wouldn't we in the EU would like to then lead that charge and be ready? Because no matter what, this is a climate change issue. Green hydrogen will play a role. So could we have more speed to then take advantage of that and say, great, let's be prepared and keep the leadership of renewable hydrogen, the momentum, and be super fast to get this done. So speed will be my ask.
All right, super clear. Mattijs, final words.
Wow. I mean, there's no silver bullet. I very much like the comments you made and speed as well. So let me pick one sort of specialty, perhaps. I think the competitiveness for Europe is going to be a big topic for the next 4 years for sure. And today we're not using Netscape anymore as internet browsers. This is also something we talked about over lunch. So we need to keep innovating. And I would call for making sure that at every project we do, we basically build on the innovations, the technologies of the future. Because one thing I'll know for sure, that even my technology won't sort of carry and any of the others, I would say immediately, it will not carry the bulk of the energy transition. Yeah, those will be iterations and newer generations thereof. So I would say invest in this, yeah, because then I think we can get competitive and we can beat the LCOA numbers that BNEF showed, because I think those are too high.
Okay, super. And then, of course, the other part of the equation is having the demand, having the lead green markets, and that's going to be the object of the next session at 4:35. So coffee, but please join me in thanking our fabulous panel.